Hello and welcome. My name is Nanny Cash, and this is part 2 of our Ultimate March Madness tournament. Now, if you haven't seen part 1 and you're just jumping into this video, please go back and watch part 1. I'm going to leave a link in the description. But we are going to start looking at each region of our Ultimate March Madness tournament and be starting to determine who is going to be our Ultimate Tournament champion. Again, a quick reminder of some of the things that I've used to help set this up are given here. This was also described in the part 1 video as well. But again, just a reminder, we got 16 different regions that we are going to be working through. And the first region that we are going to look at is the Gulf Coast region. Now, Houston is the #1 seed in that region, but we are then going to look at all the teams that are going to set up in the Gulf Coast region and start simulating one match at a time to determine who is going to be the team coming out of the Gulf Coast region into the final 16 teams in this ultimate tournament. So the first thing that you're going to notice is that we're going to have a lot more play-in games than what is in the regular March Madness tournament. We're going to introduce each individual team and then look at the whole bracket in general, and then go down and simulate every single game down to the regional final to figure out who's going to come out of the Gulf Coast region. But let's introduce the teams that are in the Gulf Coast region. Starting with our #1 seed is the Houston Cougars. Again, top in the Big 12 this year. Only lost out in the finals to Iowa State for the Big 12 championship. They are our #1 seed and probably one of the big favorites to come out of this region. Our 16 seed does require a play-in, which will include Ball State. The Cardinals, coming out of the MAC region, are just 9th in their league, okay, a 15-16 record, and they're going to play a play-in game against the Niagara Purple Eagles, a 16-16 record team. They were 6th in the Mid-Atlantic Athletic Conference, and this should be a tight matchup between these two teams. Next, we have our #9 seed is the University of Texas Arlington Mavericks, a 25-9 record team coming out of the WAC conference, 3rd in that league. They're going to be looking to revenge their WAC final loss to Grand Canyon to not make this year's March Madness tournament, but they are here in this tournament. Our #8 seed is going to be the Golden Bears out of California. Again, 7th in the Pac-12 this year with a 13-8 record. We'll see what they can bring to this tournament as well. Then we go down, and the 5th seed is going to be the SMU Mustangs, the 6th team in the American Athletic Conference, a 20-13 record. And they have to wait for a play-in game amongst our 12 seed, which is going to be the South Dakota Coyotes and the George Washington Revolutionaries. Now, the South Dakota Coyotes have a 12-20 record, 9th in the Summit League, and then the George Washington Revolutionaries are again a below 500 team at 15-17, coming out of the Atlantic 10 Conference. The 13th seed is also a play-in game amongst Coastal Carolina and Monmouth. Coastal Carolina is coming out of the Sun Belt, and Monmouth is coming out of formerly the Colonial Athletic Association. It's now the Coastal Athletic Association. And our 4th seed in this is going to be the Xavier Musketeers. Maybe not as good of a year as they've had in the past. They are 9th coming out of the Big East with a below 500 record. But we'll see what they can do in this tournament. On the other side, we then have our #3 seed, Nebraska. And so we have the Nebraska Cornhuskers at 23-11, third out of the Big 12, and lost to the Fighting Illini in the conference tournament. They have to wait for their 14th seed team, which was going to be between New Mexico State and Cal State Northridge. The Aggies from New Mexico State were 6th in the Conference USA, where the Cal State Northridge are coming from the Big West, a 19-15 record, 7th in the Big West region. Now, the 11th seed is also a play-in game between the St. Francis Red Flash, an 8-22 record team coming out of the Northeast Conference, and they're going to play the Longwood Lancers, the league champions of the Big South, with an 18-13 record. The number 6 seed is the Florida State Seminoles, a 17-16 record in the ACC, 9th in the ACC during the league, and we'll see what they can do in this new format. The number 17 is the College of Charleston Cougars, a 27-8 record team. This team could go far. They were first in their league and won the the Coastal Athletic Association against Stony Brook in the final in a great overtime game this year. Then in the 10th seed, we have a play-in game between the Siena Saints and the St. Thomas Tommies out of Minnesota. Siena is a 4-28 record team out of the Mid-Atlantic Conference, and the St. Thomas Tommies are a 20-13 record team, 4th coming out of the Summit League. Then the 15th seed is a playoff game between the American Eagles and the Columbia Lions. So American Eagles coming from the Patriot League, 4th in that league with a 16-16 record, and Columbia, an Ivy League team, 13-14 record this year, which put them in 6th in the Ivy League standings. Lastly, and I apologize for the mistake here, it should have not shown up, but it was Mississippi State and the Bulldogs, a 21-14 record team coming out of the SEC. They ended up beating the number 1 ranked Tennessee in the conference tournament, so we're going to see what they can do in this format. So here's a grand look at the entire Gulf Coast region, and we are going to go through one step at a time through this entire region. We are going to start with all of the play-in games, and then start looking at the top 16 in each region and go one match at a time. So the first game we're going to play and see is Ball State Cardinals versus the Niagara Purple Eagles. And this game was a close game throughout, but it is the Niagara Purple Eagles that had the advantage throughout most of the game, finishing off with a 4-point victory on Ball State. Next, so we see Niagara is moving on, and they're going to play Houston in their next matchup. Our next play-in game is going to be the South Dakota Coyotes versus the George Washington Revolutionaries. And in convincing fashion, the Revolutionaries walk away with a victory, a decisive victory over the Coyotes. Next in our playoff games, after George Washington's victory, and as they're going to look and play SMU, we're going to now have Coastal Carolina play the Monmouth Hawks. And it is the Coastal Carolina team that has gone on to win. They are close throughout the main part of the game, but were able to continue their lead and have a 10-point victory over the Hawks from Monmouth. So Coastal Carolina with the win are going to move on and play Xavier in their next matchup. Looking at the bottom half of the region, we see our first play-in game going to be the New Mexico State Aggies going to play the Matadors from Cal State Northridge. And it is the Aggies from New Mexico State that get the victory. A pretty convincing victory, as they had led basically the entire time on their way to the next round of the competition. Next up in the play-in rounds, we have the Red Flash of St. Francis playing the Longwood Lancers. And it is the Longwood Lancers from the Big South that are able to take the victory. Now, it wasn't easy, as they were a close matchup for the first half, but Longwood found a way to increase their lead and get a decisive victory to move on to the next round. Next up in the play-in rounds, we have the Siena Saints up against the St. Thomas Tommies out of Minnesota. And in a very close matchup, we do have St. Thomas taking home the victory, but it was pretty close. They did take Siena took an early lead, and then it wasn't until later in the second half that St. Thomas was able to close that gap and eventually achieve a 6-point victory to move on to the next round. And St. Thomas will move on to play Charleston in the next round. The last playing game we have is American University playing Columbia and the Lions from Columbia. And it is Columbia University to come away with the win. It was a very close game, and American University had the lead for a certain while, but as the second half grew on, Columbia was able to go on a run to have a decisive victory in the end, and Columbia moves on to the next round. And it will be Columbia moving on to face up against Mississippi State in the next round. So here is a look at the next round. All 16 teams are determined, and we'll start from the top again, working our way down for each of these matchups. So to start off, we're going to have the Houston Cougars go up against the Niagara Purple Eaters that beat Ball State in their first round. And it is Houston that gets the win, although within the first half, Houston had their struggles trying to separate away from Niagara, but as the second half moved on, they made adjustments and started to then stretch their lead to get a comfortable lead in the end to move on to the next round. And next up, to see who faces Houston, it'll be the winner of UT Arlington and the Mavericks versus the Golden Bears from California. And it is the Mavericks from Texas Arlington that get the victory. California took a lead and took that lead into the first half, but Texas Arlington made great adjustments and came away with a comfortable victory in the end, a 12-point victory to move on to the next round. So we will see a all-Texas matchup in our next round with Houston and Texas Arlington, but until that time, we have some more games to go, including SMU's Mustangs versus the George Washington Revolutionaries. And in a close back-and-forth game where we could have seen our first big upset, SMU does eventually get the win, but they were tied 77-77 until some late heroics, and SMU do move on to the next round of the tournament. And SMU will play whoever wins out of the Xavier Musketeers and Coastal Carolina. And in our first upset of the tournament, it is Coastal Carolina taking down the Xavier Musketeers. Coastal Carolina led almost the entire game, and Xavier did well to then bridge that gap and get their first lead of the game, but Coastal Carolina had just a little bit more at the end to then eventually achieve the 6-point victory and move on to the next round. And we have our first double-digit ranked team to be in the final 8 teams left in this region. And in any region, as this is our first region that we've been running through. Now, if we look at the other side of the bracket, we have the number 3 ranked Nebraska versus the 14th ranked New Mexico State. And it is the Cornhuskers out of Nebraska that get the victory fairly convincing all around, as they had and maintained a lead throughout the entire game to have a comfortable 20-point victory to move on to the next round. And so Nebraska moves on to the final 8 of this region, where they're going to wait the winner of Florida State and Longwood. And this was a close one, all the way down to the wire, with Longwood leading much of the game, losing that lead late on, and Florida State does just enough to squeak by and maintain the 2-point victory to move on to the next round. And so the Seminoles move on to the next round, where they are going to play the Cornhuskers. Looking at the bottom of the bracket, next we have the Charleston Cougars up against the St. Thomas Tommies, who beat Siena in a close game in their first round. And it is the College of Charleston Cougars that took care of business in this one, going away and having a comfortable lead throughout the entire game to finish off the Tommies from St. Thomas, Minnesota. And the Cougars have moved on as we wait for the final matchup in this round, which is the Columbia Lions playing the Bulldogs from Mississippi State. And in the most shocking fashion, the Lions are able to beat the Bulldogs from the SEC. A close game throughout, back and forth, but Columbia taking the last lead and maintaining it to the end to get the huge upset victory. And here is our look at our last 8 teams in the Gulf Coast region. A couple upsets, but what we need to do is continue and narrow this down to the top 4 teams out of the Gulf Coast region. And we are going to start at the very top with our Texas matchup between Houston and Texas Arlington to determine who is going to move on to the final 4 of this region. And a major upset here, as the Mavericks were able to take the lead in the second half and maintain it all the way to the end, getting a 4-point victory, removing the number 1 overall seed of the entire tournament out in the regional bracket. Close game throughout, but UT Arlington, or the Mavericks, took it all the way to the end and got the massive victory. This bracket is now wide open as UT Arlington make their way on to the next round, and they're going to wait for the SMU Mustangs or Coastal Carolina to be their next matchup. We'll see who wins. And it is the Mustangs from SMU that take the commanding lead and do not give it up, as they have the decisive victory over Coastal Carolina. The story for Coastal Carolina is now over in this tournament, but they had a good run in their upset and their 2 games won thus far. But SMU is the team that moves forward. But we will see SMU in the regional semifinals, awaiting their matchup. On the bottom half of this bracket, we are going to see who's going to win between the Cornhuskers from Nebraska and the Florida State Seminoles. And it was a close back and forth game where the Nebraska was leading most of the time, but Florida State kept it interesting, but they could not close the gap, where Nebraska is going to move on into the regional semifinals. And Nebraska, as the highest seed remaining in this region, moves forward. They await the winner of the Charleston Cougars versus the Columbia Lions. Again, can Columbia pull off the upset, or can Charleston keep rolling forward? And it is College of Charleston that get the victory, but it looked pretty scary there, as Columbia had a massive lead throughout most of the game, but they were able to close the gap and get the victory in the end, winning by 6 points and moving on to the regional semifinals. We now have the semifinals set in this region, where I have UT Arlington versus SMU on one side and Nebraska and Charleston set on the other side. This is not how I saw this going at the beginning of this, but that's why we run the tournament. So, To start off, our first matchup, the Mavericks from Texas Arlington going to play the SMU Mustangs. And in a close game with many lead changes, it is SMU Mustangs that get the victory. About, at least 8 different lead changes throughout the game, with Texas Arlington leading by the halfway point. But it is SMU that gains the lead in the second half and maintains it on their way to winning the game and moving on to the regional finals. And the other semifinal, the winner going on to play SMU to reach the Gulf Coast final will be Nebraska or Charleston. And would you look at that? It is the College of Charleston that get the win over the Nebraska Cornhuskers. It was Nebraska that had the lead and took that into the half, but it is a huge effort on the College of Charleston to not only take the lead back, but have a commanding lead moving into the finals, as they will move on to play SMU in the finals of the Gulf Coast region. And now we are here at the end of the Gulf Coast region, and we have 2 unlikely teams here at the finals, where we have the SMU Mustangs playing the College of Charleston Cougars for their ticket to make it to the top 16 teams in this ultimate tournament. Let's see who is going to win that ticket today. And the Mustangs from SMU brought their A game and never looked back, as they clearly won this game against the Cougars of College of Charleston. What a run by them. But it is SMU that is going to come out of the Gulf Coast region. And so we see that the 5 seed out of the Gulf Coast region has made it to the final 16 teams in this ultimate tournament. Wow, I did not expect a 5 seed right off the bat to make it this far, but they have earned their way to this point in the tournament. Thank you so much for watching. If you come and see the next video, we are then going to tackle the Northwest region out of Seattle to see who comes out of that region, who will eventually face SMU in the final 16. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe, and follow along as we continue on in this amazing series. Thank you again. See you next time.